Hello, everyone. My name is Kiana J., and I am the social media specialist here at the National Center on Sexual Exploitation. Thank you for joining this discussion today. The Dirty Dozen List is an annual campaign calling out 12 mainstream entities for facilitating, enabling, and even profiting from sexual abuse and exploitation. And today, we will be discussing the target, Reddit. In a moment, I'm going to invite our subject matter experts, and we will take a deep dive into the harms on Reddit. And at the end of this, we will provide actionable steps that you can take to end them. Today, you're going to be hearing from Meg Griffin, our lead public policy analyst here at NCOSE, and Rick Lane, CEO and founder of Iggy Ventures. So I'm going to go ahead and invite our guest so that we can get started.
Hi, hello Meg. Hi Rick.
Hello, Kiana.
How are you?
Hi, how are you?
Awesome, wonderful. I am ready to get into these details and really let people know what's going on with Reddit. So I'm very excited to have you two here today.
Thanks for inviting us on.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Not a problem. All right, so I'm going to start with a few questions. I'm going to start with you, Meg. So why did we decide to include Reddit on this year's Dirty Dozen list?
All right, so I know this is the first target, but I just want to remind you all that the Dirty Dozen List is NCOSE's annual campaign to highlight and expose the 12 mainstream entities facilitating sexual abuse and exploitation online. And Reddit is one of the worst, which is why they've been on our DDL a few times. Reddit has 73 million users each day, and it's a cesspool of AI generated pornography, image based abuse, and the sharing of child sexual abuse material on this horrible, horrible platform. And we've been really astonished to see the lack of change over the last few years. And this has become even more urgent with Reddit's decision to go public this year, which I know Rick will talk a little bit more on in a few minutes.
Thank you for that. All right. So is this Reddit's first appearance on the Dirty Dozen list?
Nope, this is Reddit's fourth, which gives you just a little bit of insight into how long our corporate advocacy team and our team here at NCOSE has been worried about the harms that have been allowed to proliferate on this platform and the abuses that have been allowed to occur. Reddit allows for complete anonymity to allow the worst predators to upload child sexual abuse material, to share image-based sexual abuse material, and even to pump out AI-generated pornography on the platform without any accountability, which is why it's been named to our Dirty Dozen list for 4 years now.
All right, so we know that Reddit just recently went public, right? So for child safety advocates, why is that something that is a problem? Why is that something that's unnerving?
Rick, do you want to take this one?
Sure, happy to. And my first time on Instagram Live as a guest. So if I screw the technology up, I shouldn't. I've been a technologist for 36 years, so I usually make sure these things work well. But for Reddit going public, the concern is that they have a lot more resources to expand. The reason you go public is to get more investors in than you already have. Also to make a huge profit as founders. It's not a bad outcome, but for the company, they will now have greater resources to expand their reach, expand their marketing, and improve their technology. And we should talk about that because now they can't claim that they don't have the resources to make some of the fixes that NCOSE has requested. They'll have resources for all that.
Wonderful, thank you. All right, and so this one is for you, Rick, actually. Can you talk a little bit about Reddit's recent deal with Google as part of their decision to go public, and why is this so concerning?
Yeah, it was actually with Microsoft that they announced right before their IPO. And the concern that I have with the deal is that it was touted as why their IPO number should be higher. That it was, I think it was a $64 million a year deal or something to that effect. And the question I raised was that they had just won a case dealing with that they had some CSAM on their site. Parents had sued, and they hid behind Section 230, which gives very broad liability protections to platforms for user-generated content. And so their argument was that we are not the uploaders. You should go after the uploaders. We should have protection. We don't have paid moderators. They're all volunteers, so they're not employees. So if you have any problems with CSAM being on our site, you should go after the volunteer moderators and those that are uploading. I disagree with that assessment. I think now that they have a lot more money, they can now pay moderators. And I'll talk about that in a second about paid versus volunteer. But in the case of the IPO, what I pointed out in some of my public comments was that they were claiming that they're not the uploader. But if they're selling data, if they're selling the images, if they are, or licensing, I should say, or selling the images, and they know, because they admitted that they knew that there was CSAM on their site, then they are actually distributing child pornography in violation of federal and state laws. And they never disclose that in any of their IPO filings, because you're supposed to provide information of pluses and minuses of a company when you go IPO, and that they have the potential of massive litigation, both from a criminal side and a civil side, that would not be protected by 230 because they are no longer the uploaders, but the distributors of CSAM.
And for our audience, can we clarify what CSAM stands for?
I'll let NCOSE.
CSAM is child sexual abuse material.
Thank you. Thank you.
Formerly known as child pornography.
Mhm.
Because
Yes.
the statutes that they would be violating would be the currently, until we get some changes in the federal law, child pornography laws.
Mhm.
But that's one of the updates that we hope to see made with some of the really important legislation happening this session as well, which I'm sure Rick and I will get to talk about in a bit.
Mhm. So Meg, can you talk about some of the efforts that Reddit made to clean up their act right before going public?
Absolutely. So before Reddit decided to go public, they rolled out all of these new policies, right? Policies against the child sexual abuse material being posted on their platforms, policies against the proliferation of AI generated pornography on their platforms, and even policies against image-based sexual abuse. But one of the things that Rick mentioned, right, is that they only have volunteer moderators. There's nobody to actually enforce any of these policies. And the policies are really pretty on paper, but there's nothing actually being done to enforce them and make sure that they're upheld. And the policies themselves sort of fail to cover everything that Reddit really needs to do as well. We've seen blurring of child sexual abuse material on their platforms, right? But they haven't actually removed it. It's still allowed to remain on the platform, as well as thousands of subreddits sexualizing minors. And in addition to that, their AI generated pornography policy, which expressly prohibits it, only prohibits AI generated pornography of identifiable people, right? Which is impossible to prove. But the AI models on these platforms use AI, real pornography of identifiable people to cobble together images of AI generated pornography, AI generated child sexual abuse material. So even though they may not be real people, it's still causing very real psychological and physical harms to people who are on these platforms, right? And people whose abuse material has been uploaded to these platforms and is continuing to now spit out this material. One of the models that's actually being trained on Reddit, it's an AI generated pornography model produced by Unstable Diffusion, spits out 50,000 AI generated pornography images every day. Just to let that sink in, that's an insane number. Insane. And think about everything that's being produced in a year on Reddit. Rick, do you have anything to add? I saw
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, yeah. I was the point person when News Corp bought MySpace, so that's how far back in social networking I go. So back in 2008. And we worked very hard with in terms of trying to clean up our site. We hired the best and the brightest. We ensured that our teams had the tools, but also before we rolled out any functionality, we made sure that, and to the best of our ability, that it couldn't be used for harm. That was always our first question. Can this new product or service or function be used to create harm to children? And that was sort of our mantra, at the News Corp level, and making sure that that happened. But one thing to understand about content moderation is actually three different pieces. The first part, Megan just talked about, is the policy. So you have a policy not to allow CSAM on your site. Well, you kind of have to have that policy because it's federal law. You can't have CSAM on your site and distribute it. But the second part of a policy would be the technology tool, to have something that identifies, is it CSAM or not? Is it against the policy that you stated of what you are not allowing onto the site itself? So you have a technological tool, which Reddit does not have. No one is using technological tools per se, to make sure that they don't have it in the first place. And then the third is the moderation, right? An individual, once they see it, has the economic and legal reason to ensure that it doesn't stay up. And that's where Reddit is failing in 2 and 3. So you can have this whole policy, but if you don't have technological tools to ensure that you don't have underage kids on your site, or that you're somehow ensuring that there's no CSAM on your site, or other things that violate your policy, and then you don't have a moderator that is hired to implement those policies, then all of a sudden you're failing. And that's what we see with Reddit, because in their court cases, like when they're up in Congress, and I've been up in policy meetings and on panel discussions, they talk about cats. Like, so if I'm a subreddit moderator of a cat subreddit, and someone brings a dog into the conversation, they're going to block that dog from being on. But if I have cat, and I'm going to show how old I am. There's a movie called The Jerk, and he was against cat juggling. So if I don't want cat juggling on my site, and all of a sudden, but I do, or I do want cat juggling on my site, I'm not going to ban it, right? I'm the moderator. I control what stays on and what doesn't stay off. So if someone is interested in having CSAM on their subreddit that they are moderating as a quote volunteer, then it's going to happen. And then when you try to go after Reddit for it, they say, "Oh, well, they're volunteers, and they're in control. We have no control. We can make all the revenue off the subreddit. We can do all that, but we have no control over the actual content that's being uploaded on the subreddit." And that cannot be the public policy answer that Congress wants.
Thank you. All right, so I have a two-part question for you, Rick. Can you explain a bit of the proliferation of AI-generated pornography on Reddit? And then the second question is, why has Reddit become such a popular platform for these AI models to use?
Well, I think AI is obviously, the ability to use AI for good is obvious. I mean, there's a lot of positive things. So this isn't an anti-AI conversation,
Mhm.
or the concern is using that tool for harmful purposes, and who is responsible for when they are used, or designing the tools to ensure that they are not creating harm. And that's part of the COSA discussion that we may have later. But so that it's become better, stronger. The computing power has become unbelievable. I mean, we're having this conversation on cell phones and digital devices that are far more powerful than what they used to launch the first person to the moon, right? So the power, computing power, storage, all that is diminished. When you have the ability to do AI generated content, it's virtually costs nothing. That's why they can push out. I mean, if you had to do as many videos that was we were just talking about that is now being created by AI, it'd be cost prohibitive. But now you're able to take images of a child and create thousands of videos at virtually no cost and with a potential of a lot of revenue. So the economic incentive that AI brings to this horrific use of this tool is just multiplied tremendously.
Mm, thank you. So I heard you mention COSA. So if you both actually could chime in on COSA, explaining what it is and how it ties into what we're discussing today.
So, the Kids Online Safety Act is one of the strongest child protection bills in Congress right now, and we are really excited that it was just introduced in the House last week, finally. COSA was introduced initially in February 2023 by Senators Blackburn out of Tennessee and Blumenthal out of Connecticut, and it would require platforms to have a duty of care to protect children on their platforms. They would have to consider how children are affected directly in the design of their platforms. It also puts really, really great standards into place for what platforms would have to do about minors' accounts. They would have to turn off things like geotagging or the ability for an unknown adult to contact a minor through direct messages. And we know from Facebook's own communications that that's where 75% of grooming behavior happens on their platforms, right? So these are really, really great common sense changes that the bill would make to platforms like Reddit and to Meta and to Snapchat that we really need to see put into place. And it would also increase parental controls to allow parents to have a little bit more insight into what their children are doing on these platforms, which we hear from so many parents has been such a problem, especially in cases of bullying and sexual exploitation online. It's something that parents desperately need. It also creates a transparency standard that would require platforms to open up their algorithms to someone to kind of oversee them. And Rick, if you want to, I know you know a little bit more about the ins and outs of that if you want to jump in. But we are so excited to see COSA move, and it would make a huge difference in the allowed of child sexual abuse material and AI generated pornography that really is at children's fingertips right now on these platforms. So Rick, do you want to jump in a little bit about COSA or Earn It?
Yeah, well, let's talk a little bit about COSA because the algorithms are incredibly complicated, right? And providing some transparency of how they are operating and what they are using as training models and how they're being designed is critically important. But as we also know, and you heard the person from OpenAI, the founder of OpenAI, say he has no idea how some of it works himself, right? And those and the best and the brightest. And so the goal here with this is to have some transparency, some ability to look at it to see if there are problems, but also ensure that the way they're designed is in a way that doesn't directly harm children and cause unintended consequences that could have been avoided. And so it just creates an infrastructure of accountability that currently does not exist.
Exactly. And with 4 years on our Dirty Dozen list now, it's clear that Reddit isn't making the changes themselves, so we need to see it happen today.
Absolutely. All right, so Meg, what are NCOSE's top recommendations for Reddit to make significant change?
So we have 5 main recommendations that we'd like to see Reddit implement to make some really serious change across their platforms. The first is to impose age and consent verification on their platforms. So anyone who is uploaded in image-based sexual abuse or in pornography would need to verify that they've consented to that image being uploaded, and Reddit would also have to verify the age of anyone who is included in any of those images. So we'd really like to see that put into place to stop the proliferation of image-based sexual abuse and child sexual abuse material on this platform. We'd also like to see Reddit implement mandatory email verification so that users cannot hide behind this anonymity to be allowed to upload all of this. I mean, Reddit needs to be able to see who is on their platforms, and they need to be able to be held accountable for uploading this material. We also, Reddit, as crazy as this is to some of us, is currently 13 plus. And of course, they're not really verifying the age. So there are children younger than 13 being allowed on their platform and allowed to see all of this, right? And we'd really like to see Reddit be 17 plus and to verify the age of users so that users under the age of 17 cannot come onto that platform, and just to prevent minors from accessing it. We also want to see Reddit really effectively ban and remove all forms of AI generated content. I talked about that a little bit earlier, but even when it's not an identifiable person, it's still really, really harmful when AI generated pornography is allowed to be run free on the platform. And then we also want to see Reddit ban external links to pornography and sexually explicit media on the platform. One study found that these links were up 2,400% from last year, that the sharing of pornography links was up on these subreddits to that extent. So it's really, really important to have Reddit take this down in order to make sure that the spread of that material is not proliferated on this platform, even if they do remove what is being uploaded to Reddit. Rick, do you have any additional recommendations to add to that? I'd love to know your
Yeah.
thoughts.
For me, it's really the volunteer moderators. I think that has to be addressed. I think now, as they said, they just went and had an IPO. They have a tremendous amount of resources. They need to migrate from volunteer to paid moderators. The reason they don't is because they want to save money, and not have responsibility. And I think those are two wrong reasons not to have paid moderators.
Absolutely. And I'm seeing a question in the chat. Spare Change Fresh Start says, are these recommendations documented and posted somewhere? Please visit our Reddit Dirty Dozen list page. I'm just going to highlight it, nsexualexploitation.org/Dirty Dozen List 2024. You'll be able to see all of the targets this year and to see all of our Reddit recommendations and the proof for why they've been posted on this year's Dirty Dozen list.
Wonderful. All right. So I do have another question that I saw in the chat a little earlier, but before we get to this question, I wanted to ask if there was anything else you guys wanted to discuss in closing.
I just want to remind our viewers to go visit our Reddit Dirty Dozen List page and take action. The action on that page will allow you to write directly to Reddit's corporate team and tell them what you think is wrong. And that's what we need to do on this to make Reddit make serious changes. Please take all of the actions on all of the targets because they're incredible. And a couple of them will also write to your Congress people to tell them that Congress needs to step in and it's time for the 118th Congress to be the Child Protection Congress and pass some of this legislation.
Yeah, I would emphasize the latter as well, which is Congress is now considering legislation, the House and Senate. We have bills in both houses. The COSA legislation that we mentioned passed unanimously through the Senate Commerce Committee, which is something rare up on Capitol Hill when anything passes unanimously. And there's bills introduced in the House. There was an amazing House hearing that took place this week on all these bills, including broader federal privacy legislation, but COSA was mentioned in there, and Congress is moving forward. But we need people to reach out to their member of Congress and to their senators, the U.S. senators, and ask them to co-sponsor this legislation. And if they've already co-sponsored, ask them to make sure that the leadership of the House and Senate bring it to the floor for a vote. Don't call somebody else's congressman from another state because they won't listen, or another district. Just make sure you're calling your own, because your voice does matter on Capitol Hill. It's not about money. It's about voices on the Hill. The other side has all the money, but we have all the voices. And so your voice does matter. And so please reach out to your representative, as well as your U.S. Senator.
Wonderful. Thank you. So we have a question here from Libby Fraser 5. If CSAM were to slip through the cracks of Reddit's moderation and detection tech and wind up in training sets, giving their deal with, it has Google, but I believe it should be Microsoft, could Reddit be held liable for child sex trafficking?
Yeah, there's an intent to distribute, right? And if there are things that fall through the cracks because it happens, there wouldn't be they potentially are not violating federal crime, but the laws are actually pretty strict. So one of the things that happens, especially for young people, that they don't realize is that when they take images of themselves, they are actually violating state and federal law. They could be held and criminally prosecuted for because they're underage. So the law doesn't give an exception, which is why they should really work hard to make sure that they don't have it. Now, will a prosecutor bring a prosecution based on an image going through? Probably not. But if it's a pattern, then they should be prosecuted.
Thank you. All right. Thank you both for joining us today. What a great discussion. It's amazing information. For everyone that is watching, everyone that is listening, please share this video with your friends, your family, your community, and visit dirtydozenlist.com to be able to read more about the targets that we have, as well as to take action. And join us. Join us next week, because this is a weekly series. We will be doing this every week, going over each topic, or excuse me, each target. So thank you guys so much for joining. And I'm going to go ahead and end this live now.
Thanks for
Thank
having us.
you very much.
Bye.